join. We're waiting for Ayanna, then we'll get started. Yeah.
You guys in front.
Good morning, good afternoon to all of you. Thank you so much for joining us and being here with us. I'm really excited and proud to have my colleagues, fresh and seasoned, joining me to introduce our bill, the Federal Workers Childcare Protection Act of 2019. What this bill does is quite simple. It makes sure that the people who are suffering because of the president's manufactured crisis are the very least able to cover their child care costs. As you all know, we have nearly 800,000 federal employees and 2,000 contractors that are about to miss their second paycheck. And they have no guarantee that the next one will come anytime soon. But just because their paychecks have stopped, it doesn't mean that the bills stop piling up.
That's right.
And for thousands of parents, that includes a bill for childcare. And to make matters worse, many of these workers are being forced to find alternate arrangements because childcare centers in many of the federal buildings have been forced to close their doors. As long as those daycares are closed, many parents are paying double. They're paying for temporary childcare, and they still are required to pay for the government daycare. On Tuesday, I met with a constituent, Nick Bratson, who works at the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission that enforces our civil rights laws. And he's a father of 2 young children. Since he is an essential employee, he has to keep his kids in childcare while he goes to work every single day without pay. So he's paying for childcare, but he himself is not getting paid. And we think that is very wrong. So I will close by saying that this bill is very personal to me. I'm a working mom with 3 beautiful children, and I know firsthand the cost associated with childcare. I couldn't imagine having support my family and pay for their childcare bill while I wasn't getting paid. This shutdown is wrong on so many fundamental levels. The least we can do is to make sure that people can keep their families afloat while we work to reopen government. So you'll hear from my colleagues on why they have decided to join me in sponsoring this bill. And I am grateful that in this new Congress, we have voices that are not only diverse in race or gender, but we have members who are diverse in perspective. It is the first Congress in a long time that has a huge number of working moms. And we'll be tackling a lot of these issues that we have personally dealt with in our own lives so that we can make sure to alleviate some of the stresses some of our constituents might be feeling that is not evident to everyone. So next I will have Ayanna Pressley, Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley, say her remarks.
Good afternoon. Thank you to my sister in service, Congresswoman Omar, for calling this matter to our attention and bringing us all together to remind us what is at stake and who is being hurt in this manufactured crisis. I'm proud to stand here, although I wish we didn't have to, but I'm proud to stand here in solidarity with the thousands of federal workers and my colleagues to address the fact that they are facing financial ruin because of a manufactured shutdown perpetrated by the occupant of this White House. I appreciate the opportunity to be invited to sign on as an original co-sponsor of the Federal Worker Child Care Protection Act. This bill will help provide critical support for the hundreds of thousands of federal workers who have been furloughed or required to work without the promise of a paycheck to cover the cost of child care. For 34 days now, 34 days, more than 800,000 federal workers and thousands of low-wage food service, janitorial, and security contracted workers have had their lives turned upside down by the occupant of this White House, who has demonstrated little, if any, empathy and certainly no patriotism. This is not putting country first to compromise the security, health, and safety and the very stability of the American worker and family. Tomorrow, thousands of those federal workers will miss out on their second paycheck, causing many to question how they will keep up with their bills, keep their lights on, keep their homes warm, and food on the table for their families. This shutdown has further exacerbated many of the economic disparities and challenges so many families were already facing. I know this is certainly true for the 7th Congressional District, which I represent. For my constituents, the cost of child care was already a struggle. In fact, Massachusetts is the second highest in the nation at nearly $30,000 a year. That's more than the cost of tuition at a public college or university. Adding insult to injury, these families, despite the closures of countless child care centers and federal buildings across the country, families are still having to pay weekly fees just to keep their child's slot in their child care center. As Rep. Omar alluded to, they're being forced to find alternative arrangements as they are forced to report to work without the prospects of a paycheck, essentially doubling the burden on the families that can afford it the least. This bill would allow families to seek reimbursement for these costs and to help alleviate these burdens. I want to thank Rep. Omar for actively listening to those in need and acting accordingly and inviting us to join her with her in this effort. We must do everything we can to support the workers and their families that are living a daily nightmare as a result of this shutdown. Again, I want to thank Rep. Omar for her support of my legislation, the Fair Compensation for Low-Wage Contract Employees Act, which will allow for the lowest wage contractors to receive back pay in addition to federal employees. They are the most vulnerable amongst us low-wage hourly workers, custodians, food service workers, security workers, for whom currently there is no mechanism when this shutdown ends for them to be made whole, and I thank her for her support in that endeavor. Across the nation, Americans are hurting. It is our responsibility to do whatever we can to address and to mitigate this hurt, and we call on all our colleagues in the Senate to bring a vote to the floor and to reopen this government now. Okay, and now bring my colleague and a dear friend, Representative Katie Hill, California.
Thank you so much, and I want to thank my colleagues, and I want to thank especially Representative Omar for her leadership in this endeavor. I decided to co-sponsor this legislation after coming back from last weekend in my district where I met with transportation workers, particularly TSA agents, who are making, in many cases, less than $40,000 a year, who told me over and over again about how childcare was their number one concern. They were ready to serve. They believe in the mission of their organization. They were willing to make the sacrifice of showing up to work even when they're not getting paid because they believe in the safety and security of our country and of the passengers they work for. But they didn't know what to do with their kids. They had no idea how they were going to continue to pay for childcare when they weren't getting paychecks themselves. And so this was of immediate need. This is something that I was really excited when Representative Omar told me about this legislation. But the fact is, we should not be having to make these stopgap measures to create a Band-Aid for the fact that our government is failing to do its job, and that this administration and the Senate have put this halt to the work that we're supposed to be doing, have put hundreds of thousands of lives in limbo for a political stunt that is completely detrimental to our economy and to the livelihoods of American workers. So we're sponsoring this. We're going to move this through, but we shouldn't have to do any of this, and that's why we're going to be doing everything that we can to ensure that our colleagues in the Senate vote to reopen the government immediately. Thank you. Oh, sorry.
I'm Congresswoman Jan Schakowsky from the 9th District of Illinois, the seasoned member here, thrilled to be here with powerful new members, young women, women with families, to talk about this legislation. And I especially want to thank Congresswoman Omar for putting this event together and for introducing this legislation. We talk about 800,000 federal workers, but think about the families. How many people that makes. We are talking about millions of people right now, children included, that are struggling, that are worrying, that are wondering about where they're going to go tomorrow to be taken care of as their parents go to work, or maybe try and get another job. I've heard of many federal workers who are driving Ubers and Lyfts and trying to find part-time jobs. This is disgraceful. These are hostages of the President of the United States, who cares nothing about these workers, even as they are running out of money. Tomorrow is the second day of no checks. The bills keep coming. Now, what Representative Omar's bill deals with are the roughly 100 federal child care facilities that provide care for thousands of children a day. And of course, due to this shutdown, as was mentioned, many of these are closed, but the workers still have to pay. And what has already been pointed out too is that what does that mean? They have to pay twice if they need to find child care. Pull it all together. Imagine that. Going to work without getting a paycheck, having to pay for the closed child care center, and having to pay or find somebody who will do a good job taking care of their children. This is completely unacceptable, and more importantly, it's completely unnecessary. If we're talking about border security, Democrats are ready to do that, but not while all of these millions of people, these families, are being held hostage. So I'm very proud to be a co-sponsor of Representative Omar's Federal Worker Child Protection Act. It is the least that we can do for the hard-working patriots that service so many millions of others in our country. Everybody in our country relies on these federal workers. We owe them to be able to pay back for this child care. Thank you.
Very impassioned talking points from our seasoned member. Yes. We are just excited to at least be able to do this for these workers, and we'll continue to vote on a bill and send it over to the Senate to reopen the government. But we are doing piecemeal bills just to help supplement a lot of the issues that some of these workers are dealing with. And so with that, if anybody has a question, we'll take some. Yeah.
The bills that we're sending over, understand, are bills that the leader of the Senate, Mitch McConnell, agreed to. These are Republican bills that we send over. And because he is completely a captive of the president and says, well, whatever he wants to do, we're no longer in favor of those bills. So we're doing everything we can to try and open the government, and in the meantime, to make sure that we're going to help. So thank you for your legislation.
I mean, that's a really good point about being captive. We're supposed to be an independent branch of government here in Congress, and to wait to get marching orders from the president on what we should be doing is essentially wrong. And so I hope that he hears us and shows some leadership.
I ask the seasoned and the unseasoned among you. The shutdown's being depicted, for better or worse, as Nancy Pelosi versus Donald Trump. How do you characterize that battle so far? Is it an even contest? It seems to be after 5 weeks. And how do you see Speaker Pelosi's performance during these 5 weeks?
So I'm not a history buff, but what I do understand that this is the first time we've had a president shut down our government. So this shutdown is squarely on the shoulders of the occupant, as my sister says, of the White House. And if this was to happen in any other country, there would be a vote of no confidence taken, and there will be no government. His full administration would not exist. And so for this president to shut down our government because he doesn't know how to negotiate is just a complete disaster. And so
clearly Speaker Pelosi does know how to negotiate. Is it an even contest?
she certainly does, and we have full confidence that she's negotiating on behalf of us and on the interest of the American people. We took an oath to care for the health and the well-being and the safety of the American people. With the continued shutdown, we are going to see a real crisis take place. And we are very much focused in making sure that we do the work of reopening the government and then come back and have a conversation about what it looks like to have a holistic immigration reform bill and what it looks like for us to protect Americans.
Anyone else on that?
Sure. Yes, full confidence in our speaker because she is negotiating in good faith, keeping the American people at the fore of her mind. Shutdown is not policy. We're sent here to make laws, to legislate, to uplift, to advance communities, to stabilize families, to right the injustices of the past. And we cannot do that work for as long as the government is in shutdown. And the cruel irony here is that, the crisis at the border is a humanitarian crisis that will not be solved by a medieval wall. It can only be resolved by policy. We need to create compassionate, comprehensive pathway to citizenship. And we should have that policy debate, but we cannot have it for as long as the government is shut down. And the occupant of this White House has created a tsunami of hurt, a manufactured crisis. So we have a humanitarian crisis at the border, and then he is creating and leading the charge for a humanitarian crisis in this country, and has framed this entire shutdown in a Trojan horse of security, when he is threatening the security, health, and safety of American workers and families every single day. That is not a patriot. These workers, Representative Schakowsky and I were with them in the Hart Building yesterday. Many of us were with them in protest with our labor brothers and sisters 2 weeks ago. And they were saying, we want to work. And what I'm heartened by, their resilience and their pride, their patriotism is so great that they are demanding to work not only because they need money for insulin, for medications, for their mortgage, for rent, for childcare, for elder care, which no one is talking about. Not only because they need the money for those bare necessities, but because they find pride and value and dignity in the work that they do for this country, which is not happening. The Institute for Peace, the Environmental Protection Agency, the Food and Drug Administration, TSA workers, air traffic controllers, they are all threatening to strike. So this has been framed in a Trojan horse of security, and our very security is being threatened and undermined every single day. So you're right, we did take an oath. And that oath, the oath that we took was to protect the Constitution and the American people from all threats, foreign and domestic. And the occupant of this White House is a threat to the American people.
Let me say one thing, too. Our Speaker of the House is not going to negotiate with a hostage taker.
That's right.
Is not going to negotiate with a hostage taker. The negotiation is about, if it's about border security, we have totally agreed. The speaker has talked about the proposals that Democrats are willing to talk about. That's ready for negotiation, not as long as 800,000 workers and their families are being held hostage by the President of the United States. This is not how policy is done. And she is also very aware, if now we start negotiating with the President about a wall or anything else, the next time that he wants something on the policy front, he'll feel like a winner and shut down the government again. We have a process. We have regular order. We are the legislative branch of this government. We are not going to negotiate, and the leader is not. And I think the American people, my sense is, the polling data seems to show, and when I talk to the workers, they are in it to win it against the president and then negotiate. They want to go back to work, but not as long as they are being held hostage.
Just super quick. I think the framing of the debate as being between President Trump and Speaker Pelosi is completely inaccurate. Last time I checked, we are in a democracy, and we are in the people's house right now. And the Democratic majority happened when all of us, representing 700 to 800,000 people, were elected. And Leader Pelosi, Speaker Pelosi, was elected by all of us. So she represents the American people when she's going into those negotiations. President Trump is representing a smaller and smaller minority of people, and even his own people are abandoning him at a very fast rate because of what's happening and the consequences of what's happening right now. So you don't get to, as a leader of a free country, you don't get to shut down the government and fail to fulfill your basic obligations of a government because of a policy discussion. This is simply not allowed. We cannot let this happen, and that's why we're going to do what we have to do.
Some discussion, Anna Edgerton with Bloomberg. There's been some discussion about a border security proposal because Democrats say that they support border security, and there's been some pressure to show what that actually means. Are there any red lines for border security that you personally and representing your constituents absolutely would not support?
We haven't seen that proposal yet. And
but like, if it involved like some kind of physical barrier, or are there any like red lines you absolutely wouldn't support?
I mean, I can't speak for everyone up here with me, but I will say, for me, I am not open to, will consider, entertain any proposal that is not just to solely reopen the government. That is the debate we need to have right now and what it takes for us to reopen the government. We have fulfilled our piece in that debate, and we will have the discussions of what border security looks like, what immigration reform should look like. All of those conversations will happen once this shutdown ends and the American people, our federal employees, are able to get their paychecks and feed their families and pay their mortgage and pay their rent.
Pat Condon, Minneapolis Star-Tribune. Do you have an idea of how much it would cost, say, on a weekly basis to make these reimbursements? And do you intend them to be retroactive? And would you make them, even if, say, the shutdown ended early next week, would you still want to make retroactive reimbursements?
So cost is different for each individual that is within the people that we want to cover this bill. And so we haven't really looked at how much is going to cost. And once we are able to deliberate the bill, we will have that number in mind. But yes, we do expect it to be retroactive. Most of these federal daycare centers have a long waiting list. And so we know that many of these employees who utilize these centers as childcare centers, they have been on a long waiting list to get their spot and to have their children be housed in the same facility that they're working at. And so they can't afford to lose their space if they stop paying. So that's why most of them will continue to pay for that child care service, even though it's not functioning for them at the moment and they can't access it. So what the cost will be on individual basis, and we'll address that then.
Well, and whatever the cost may be, it's just another addition to the billions and billions of dollars that we've lost and that this government shutdown has cost us.
In this crisis, do you think who is the loser, who is the winner?
The American people, democracy. This is not, for us, this isn't a partisan issue. For us, this is about upholding the oath that we took to, again, protect the health and the well-being of the American people we have been elected to serve. And so the losers of this crisis are the people. And, I was saying to someone earlier, as an organizer, one of the fastest mechanisms that I see with this shutdown ending is for the American people to recognize that they have an occupant in the White House who is no longer interested in having our democracy intact, who's no longer interested in serving the best interest of the American people. Someone who wants to bankrupt our country as he has bankrupted all of the businesses he has led. Someone who does not understand what leadership means, what leadership looks like. Someone who doesn't understand the weight of the title he has inherited. And so once that happens, once the TSA workers can no longer bear coming to work and not having the lights on in their apartments and in their houses, once we see, God forbid, food outbreaks happen because we can't inspect it, once we see federal judges not able to conduct their business, once the continuation of the FBI and border security are not able to do their job, then we will see an uproar in the streets of Americans taking their country back the same way they did when they elected this new majority. We'll take one more. Okay, over there.
Congresswoman Omar, it's actually on a different topic. Over the weekend, there was a bit of an uproar.
We're just gonna stay
any comment
on
from
this.
the Lincoln Memorial, SCAFU, this tweet that you
We're just
deleted?
gonna stay on this particular topic.
Thank you.
So how about you, Kira?
Oh, I was just going to ask that Liz Landers with CNN, the Republican House Minority Leader McCarthy made some comments earlier today criticizing the Speaker for dismissing members for the weekend, and he said he's going to stay in town and work through negotiations. Do you guys think you should be staying in town? Are you going to stay in town? Is there anything you could do over the weekend to help break this impasse?
Well, I would just say that, each member arrives at their own decision, individually. But I know that for myself and all of my colleagues, whether we are here in the district, we are working, and we are working to end this shutdown, but we are also intentionally engaging and actively listening to the people who have been impacted so that we don't lose sight of that. We are here today, thanks to Congresswoman Omar's leadership, introducing legislation, but legislation that we would not even be proposing if we were not actively listening to those most impacted by this shutdown. When I'm in district, not one person has said to me, "Why aren't you in Washington?" They are glad that I'm there. They want to be heard. They want to be seen. They want to know everything that we're doing. So I know Congresswoman Hill has already had town halls. I know Congresswoman Schakowsky has been meeting with folks in district. So, we each arrive at these decisions individually. Many of us will be lifting up these stories on the floor of the House today in 1-minute speeches or in 5-minute speeches during the progressive hour. And so we're doing both. It's a hybrid, but I think where the American people this is a representative democracy. And so how do we know whether or not we are truly representing our constituents if we are not in consultation and in community with them? So that's why I think it is important that if we have the opportunity to return to our districts, then we should be doing that.
I'd be really interested to know what the minority leader is doing. I mean, he says he's here, but is he talking to Mitch McConnell in the Senate, other senators, his senators? Is he talking to the White House? Being physically here doesn't mean that he is really working to end this crisis. We have seen no evidence of that from him. And as Representative Pressley said, many of us will be on the floor this afternoon, and we are also on 24-hour notice to come back and stand ready to do real negotiations after the government is open once again.
And the last thing I would say is, I'm sorry, go on. Okay.
No,
No, I just wanted to follow up on that. I mean, we don't know what work he is referencing when he says he wants to stay here and do work, but we know that he is avoiding the real work that happens when you go back home, the real work of being a representative, listening to your constituents. We know that many of our Republican colleagues have had, the few that have gone back home have had town hall forums that have not gone very well because the American people are very upset. The American people don't like us playing games. The American people want to make sure that we are here and working on behalf of them in good faith.
Kevin McCarthy is my neighbor to the north, and when I had my town halls, I have had a number of his residents coming and telling me exactly that they want to see the government reopened and that he's not coming back. So I don't think that staying here in Washington is really a noble feat. Instead, it's avoiding your constituents.
He's afraid? All right, thank you all.